and we will get started for those who are in already. So hello and welcome everyone to the October 2025 educational webinar, co-hosted by the Kent branch and the Lambton branch of Ontario Ancestors. My name is Cindy Robichaud and I am part of the Kent branch team. Also with us tonight is Alan Campbell and Jane Teskey, and they are both from the Lambton branch team. Thank you for joining us. We do have a couple of housekeeping items. This presentation will be recorded and available on our branch websites. Your microphones and cameras have been turned off, but we welcome your questions and comments. So recently, Zoom did some updates, as technology often does, and this is mainly to the chat feature. You can still hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, and you will see across the little bar at the bottom, you'll see the chat icon. If you click on this, the chat box will open, and for some, it may look new, but you should still see the Everyone button, and you can submit your questions here, and they'll come to myself or to Alan or to Jane. You'll also see a little button beside that that says New Chat, and that's where you would chat individually to somebody. So you would click on the New Chat, you would find the person that you want to talk to, and then you can message back and forth to them. If you do not see the chat box the way it is here, when I first went on after Zoom did their first update, I didn't see the Everyone in the New Chat. I actually saw up above that in the top corner, there was a little tiny blue icon that looked like a piece of paper and a little pencil on it. So I clicked there and that enabled my chat box, because at the bottom it was saying chat was disabled, but it's not really disabled. So for some people, you might have to enable it that way first. All right. Okay, so let's get started. For anyone joining us for the first time, let me tell you a bit about Ontario Ancestors. Ontario Ancestors, also known as the Ontario Genealogical Society, is a nonprofit registered charity which was founded in 1961. It is the largest genealogical society in Canada with a mission to encourage, bring together, and assist those interested in the pursuit of family history and to preserve Ontario's genealogical heritage. Be sure to visit the website to learn more about resources and support available to assist you in your family history research. Ontario Ancestors has over 30 branches and several special interest groups all across Ontario, including the Kent branch and the Essex branch. The Kent Branch Family History Library and Collection is located on the second floor of the Chatham-Kent Public Library in Chatham. We are open to the public on Fridays and Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., and we also try to accommodate other times by appointment. The Lambton Branch Family History Collection is housed at the Lambton County Archives in Wyoming, Ontario, which is open Wednesdays to Saturday, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I think there was an extra day. Was it Tuesday? There was a little bit later hours, I think.
Thursday evening.
Thursday evening till 8, right?
Yes.
Okay. We always like to connect with people interested in genealogy and local history. You can connect with us at either one of these emails. You can also join our branch Facebook groups with hundreds of people who are interested in genealogy and local history. And we have very comprehensive websites, both the Essex branch and the Lambton branch, with resources for both their branch members, but also for the general public. Our upcoming events. Next month, Kent branch will co-host our last webinar for 2025 with the Essex branch. And you can register to attend this webinar on either the Kent or the Essex branch websites. And then Lambton branch welcomes speaker Ken McKinley for their November webinar. You can also register on their website to attend this. Or for more information. I know there's a lot on here to read. Okay. So now for tonight's presentation, genealogical research, genetics versus ancestral, when they don't match, with our guest speaker, Gordon McBean, joining us from Manitoba. Alan, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Thanks, Cindy. The title of this presentation caught our eye a while back, and we decided that Gordon would be a good person to speak to us. And then when I read his bio and it talked about him journeying into the dark, never-ending black hole known as genealogical research, I knew he was our kind of guy. Anyway, he's a retired education technologist from Red River College, where he supported the college staff in classroom technologies in the educational environment. He's an active Manitoba Genealogical Society member since 1996, past president, and served as VP of Information Technology. And a real key thing in my mind, the architect and developer of the MGS Manny online database, which contains 1.5 million records. And I have been able to access that in the past when I was doing my Manitoba research. It is wonderful. He has given over 40 presentations, has been spoken at OGS conference at least once, if not more. He was recouping from an operation when his mother introduced him to genealogy, and then it all started. Then in the 1990s, he found old unidentified photographs, what else, from his father's side, which started that journey into the black hole. Then he discovered a large box of negatives, obviously with no names, which also added to the situation. He is actively involved with the Scottish cultural community and has served on, and perhaps is still serving on the board of the Clan McBean International, Inc. He has expertise in digital photography, digital audio, computer technology, and genealogy research. And he has created and maintained several websites, and I'll let him flash that. He may well do that, as well as several WordPress and Facebook sites. He's an avid photographer, and he and his wife enjoy traveling in their RV around North America with much genealogy and cemetery visiting. Welcome, Gordon.
Oh, hello. Well, thanks for inviting me, and I'm always overwhelmed when people do the intro. And then I get embarrassed and I go, I really have to cut that down a bit. It's too much. But I mean, when you've been doing genealogy for about 50 years or over 50 years now, you end up being quite involved with so many different areas. And while I'm talking here, I'm bringing up my share. So we should be good at this point. So we're taking a look at, obviously, looking at DNA. And one of the things that they go hand in hand is DNA and trees. Now, when we talk about DNA nowadays, there's basically four big companies involved with it, and they each are slightly different. So Ancestry, for example, has the largest DNA client database out there. That's their strength, but a lot of it is in the USA. If you look at MyHeritage, they say they're the largest one in Europe. 23andMe, it tends to focus mainly on health-based DNA. So sometimes trying to get people to respond to a genealogist, they're not really interested. And then we get the other big one currently is the family tree DNA. And what makes them unique is they're the only ones that do the Y-DNA and the MT, or mitochondrial DNA. So what are we getting from those companies? And they all give us the same thing for our autosomal testing. They give us the list of who shares DNA with us, so called matches, and it gives us an estimate of our ethnicity. Try to say that several times. And really what it is, it's a geolocation. It's saying that people in a given area you share certain DNA with. So nowadays we tend to think of countries. Really what we need to think about is ethnic groups, or groups that lived in certain areas. And the surprise is quite often those groups are, their influence is far broader than we think it is. And then finally, what it gives us the amount we share in terms of the DNA with our matches. The problem is with any of them is that you find a good match, but your match you have a good link to does not host any sort of tree. Or the one I love is the one of a tree of three. Them, they're one of their parents and their grandparents, and they're all listed as private. You get no information from that. So we're going to look at some of the what you have to deal with. But just because they don't have a tree, that doesn't stop us. So really what we're doing is, if we're starting to look at the information that's there in the DNA match, is we have to ask the right questions. What are we looking at? What is it likely that that information, where can it take us? And then the other thing we need to do right off the bat is have an understanding of what it is we actually want from our DNA results. Do we want to be able to prove our existing tree, that the paper trail that we've done following our genealogical process of recording a tree and building a tree? Or are we looking to expand or find certain lines? Or in some cases, some of the people I've worked with were looking to find, jump over an adoption. There had been a split. They wanted to connect with or find out more about their ancestors, and they were trying to see if there's any way of connecting with those people. So here I am I do a Y-DNA test, and it turns out I don't really match to my last name, McBean. The Y-DNA is a father, 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 father going up the paternal line. And typically in the Western world, we think of it as our surname is passed down through that channel. Well, you can imagine how disappointed I was when I found out that I did a Y-DNA test and I didn't have a single McBean that I matched to. Most of the ones I was matching to were McRae's. So here I am. I got the kilt. I've got the whole outfit. But at least the McRae tartan is too different than the McBean one. It's still mainly red, feels sort of almost right. But when you do a Y-DNA test, one of the things it does give you is a haplogroup. So you have that number, that RFGC 17603 is the haplogroup that I'm part of. What that tells me once I go through it is that I'm related to McRae. And I started at a lower level of testing. I moved up several times, just trying to get a better picture of how I was related. And eventually I did what was called the big Y. And I heard back from a fellow that sent me, a McRae that sent me an email and said, he was really excited. He said, "You're the closest match I've ever had. I'm more closely related to you than I am most of the other McRaes." So we're the only two people in that particular haplogroup. And what we know from that, and what he explained, is that basically where we connect to each other goes back to roughly the 1600s. And I don't know about most of you, but my paper trail, my genealogical tree doesn't go back that far. One of the things he mentioned in trying to figure out this name change is he was saying, well, maybe our ancestor was named something like Duncan Ban McRae. And the Ban in Scottish means good looking. So I'll take that, right? I can't have my McBean last name, but you can see where the Bane could have been moved through and spelt in terms of my last name, McBean. So what are some of the causes when we don't match, whether it's a autosomal DNA, which is a standard family finder type of thing that people do, or a Y-DNA? Well, one of them, or a few of them, that it could be is a non-paternity event, or the father that's expected is not the father. It could be a name change, so that the family changed their name. It could be an adoption took place. It could be pedigree collapse. And it could also be that your match goes back to before the adoption of last names. So yes, if we take a look in more detail with each one. So non-paternity event, yes, it did happen back then too. But if you look at what non-paternity event means, or it's also called misattributed parents, paternity or non-parental event, NPE, and you'll see those initials sometimes, NPE, when you're dealing with different literature written on this. So that it's a biological father is not the one that you have on paper, not the one that's expected. So and that term NPE, or non-paternity event, it started in about 2000 as part of a study that was done of Y chromosome haplogroups for the Sykes males. And one of the things, the last point is, it's sometimes referred to as a paternity fraud, but that suggests that there was malicious intent in saying who the father was, or the parents were, rather than possibly being accidental. So really it comes down to what it is. It's a breaking in the line in the Y chromosome trail and our surname trail. And again, it can be, we talked about, and we'll look at more detail, the number of ways that that can take place. So the name change. We've all heard the stories about people arriving at Ellis Island, and the agent can't write their name, so he just creates a new name for them because you're now Smith or something like that. But really, a lot of it were people arriving there and wanting to fit in. So they anglicized the name so it sounded more easier to pronounce for people in North America. Sometimes it's people hiding from the law, they'll change their name. Sometimes it's changed to protect privacy. Well, heard of witness protection, where they give you a complete new background and name and hide you somewhere so other people can't find you. And then there's a case, and particularly in certain parts of Europe, where the government would forcibly change people's name. Another country would absorb part of another country and decide their names didn't sound enough like the country that was taking over. So sometimes they would actually change the last name of those people to make it sound like more of the country. So the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, for example. We have adoption. We're all familiar with that. We probably all know someone that has been adopted. And one of the things, you get open and closed adoptions. You also get times where people want to be connected to the adoption through the adoption to the other side, and other times people don't. And both sides have to agree in order for that channel of communications to be opened up. Then we get things like pedigree collapse and endogamy. Basically, they're similar situations. One of them is a lot more people involved. So endogamy is things like the Cajuns in Louisiana, or the Acadians in Nova Scotia, where people over and over again, over multiple generations, intermarried between people that were of the same bloodline. and it gets very hard to be able to trace things back in your relationships with DNA. Now, one of the key things you have to know when you're dealing with DNA is a DNA test is no substitute for genealogical research. And the only way to really see how you're connected is to do both the searching through genealogy, which proves the relationship, and then the DNA is the sporting. It's a tool, it's a hint, it's something that gives you additional information. And as genealogists, we're always dealing with a lot of different hints, and then our process is to go through and decide what is the preponderance of evidence giving us what is the truth that's there. And then another one's the pre-adoption of surnames. And when you look at going back to the 1600s, that's probably, or could very well be why I don't have McBean ancestors in the Y-DNA line, in that they actually, our lines both go back before people actually used last names. And it wasn't until the Norman Conquest, 1066, that it even started to be a thing. But it was really the upper royalty, the landowners, the upper crust that would deal with last names. The common person probably didn't have one. And then that would evolve, and people had to take last names when they started doing things like the taxation, because they had to keep track of all these Johns or Thomases. So you'd have Thomas, who's his son is the son of John. He'd be Thomas Johnson, or Peter Baker, named after an occupation in that, or something that you stand out for. Peter Whitehead, or Richard Whitehead, had white hair. And when we look at things like Mary Webster, we wonder about that, but really it's Old English. It's a female weaver, a Webster. So surnames, they were actually quite fluid, and people didn't stick with the same one. So John the blacksmith, when he developed more skills, might move up to shoeing horses and looking after the hooves and the health of the animals, and he would become a farrier, and therefore his name was switched to John the Farrier. His trade is his last name. As I said, it was only things like the introduction taxing or introduction of the parish registers, in that case 1538 in Scotland, where the hereditary surnames started to be tracked down through generations. Now, meaning of names, one of the things that you probably want to look into is your last name and try to figure out where that name might have come from. So things like Wheeler is a wheelwright, or someone that worked on carts or made carts. Everything down to Shaw, which is another word for wood. There's all sorts, and you can look up the meaning of your name quite easily on the internet. But when the reality, when it comes down to it, your genetic tree is different than your genealogical researched family tree. So one of them is tracking families and your ancestors back through it, whereas your genetic tree will actually track your genes. It'll track the genetic what you inherit in your genetics from your ancestors. So, and I hate to say it, but testing companies lie. We've all heard it. You just have to start. It's what they say, but you don't have to. It's not just starting. You have to learn a lot of information and techniques to really make proper use out of DNA. And then what we have to do is apply what we learned to analyze and understand our results, because it's I find it's a very continuous process. Every time I learn something, I find out there's something I don't know, then I have to go and learn a bit more. But the reality is you can get started on the very basics with just knowing the basics. And then as you want to get further and further, the more difficult questions that arise, you can answer by a more sophisticated process. And in reality, it's just another tool in our toolbox. So it's something else we use to try to break through brick walls and further our research. So sometimes if we're lucky, someone else might have researched the line back further than us. If we can attach to the or match to them and prove the line that we're related on, with research, sometimes we can make that connection that might add another generation or even two to a particular line that we have. Now, I mentioned the different test companies. One of the things that you have to decide right off the bat what you're trying to do with a DNA test, as I mentioned. So the autosomal is the family one. It's the broadest. It gives you the most information, and it tracks all of your lines. So it can give you matches in any one of your lines that's out there. The main thing is are there people in those lines that have taken the test, and do you actually share DNA with them? The Y chromosome is the father. It is only present in males, and it tracks back to the family line. Mitochondrial DNA is the mother line. And one of the things that happens there, of course, is every generation, the last name changes as you go back up the mother's line. But if that's one of the things you're trying to prove, that would be the test you want to do. And then finally, we have the X chromosome, which will give us additional information in addition to the autosomal one. And sometimes it gives us a unique path that information if we're trying to refine other testing down even further. So a few definitions is genealogy, the assignment name, dates, locations, the basic information, or what I call the skeleton. If we take DNA, it's examining the genes passed down from generation to generation. And it's very broad strokes, and there's a lot of variation in the relationship, so you still have to prove them with old-fashioned genealogical work and to narrow it right down to the actual relationship with the person, whether it's the parent or the child. Those two zones, if you will, can overlap. So sometimes it's hard to tell. If you build out a tree, you can look at ages roughly and get a sense of which one you're looking at. And then finally, we have family history, and that's putting the meat on the bones. That's doing the research, adding context and content to the lives of our ancestors, sort of the historical time they lived in. What was life like? How did they probably live? How did they make a living? It's all those other information that makes the story more interesting. So if you look at each of those different areas of study that you might see or define yourself as doing, the key difference is the scope. DNA is dealing with biological and material. Genealogy is more of a social, and the family history is a study of the family relationships and additional information. We use different methods for DNA. DNA is very scientific, whereas the others involve searching records and finding additional pieces of information, whether it's a gravestone or other information. So DNA can reveal a biological ancestor to genetic traits, while genealogy aims to reconstruct the complete picture of a family and our ancestors. So genetic genealogy. And one of the things we're looking at is we hear all sorts of terms like genealogical DNA tests. We get DNA profiling, DNA testing. And then when we combine those with things like the genealogical methods that we're used to, we can then infer a genetic relationship between two individuals. If you look at the size of the database, in 2019, there was about 30 million people combined in all of the different major DNA databases. And today we're somewhere over 50 million. So we're looking 6 years, it's almost double. So it is an area that grew rather drastically and rapidly. It slowed down, the growth has slowed down currently. Not quite as many people are taking the test, but you're looking at a huge pool of other relatives, potential relatives of your ancestors, relatives that may be in one of those databases. One of the things that's interesting is when you look at the ages, 18 to 34, there's 30 to 35%. 34 to 54, there's 20 to 25. And 55 and older, you're down to about 10 to 15%. So there's a real age difference of different, a real difference in different ages to how many people are doing. Young people tend to be more accepting of this as a technology or something they're willing to do. Now, your genetic tree only contains those ancestors who have received some of the DNA that you received. And we receive different parts of the DNA from our parents, both parents roughly 50%. But our siblings may have received a different 50%. So we're not a perfect copy. We don't have all of their DNA. And it's very random. It's if you test 4 family members, so I have 4 DNA tests autosomal that I've done, and we all have slightly different match lists. We all have unique matches that the other 3 may not have. So the reality is part of an ancestor's DNA may not have been passed down to you. And what that means is you may not show up as a match with cousins or more distant cousins because you didn't or they didn't receive a certain person's DNA that would show you as a match. And then we also have through our research, you've probably found some of this where someone passes away, a couple dies, or the wife dies and the husband can't look after the kids. Family take the kids in and raise them as their own. So on every census record, they're shown as a son or daughter. Every record we find, they list those as the parents, but it may not have been the biological parents. So, and that information about being adopted or brought into the family may not have been passed down to through the generations and gotten to us. So both types of trees are really important to doing research because they will give us additional information and bring it into our research that helps us in breaking down brick walls and expanding different lines further out, or the other side of going up the tree is also expanding the base of the tree by adding all of the other descendants from your original ancestors. Now, this is an example of my what my daughters, in this case, it goes 10 generations out. So they're in the middle. And then as you go through, on the left is my family tree, and on the right is my wife's family tree. And you can see how successful I've been in researching some of these back. So for the most part, back into about the early 1800s, I'm doing pretty good. After that, there's a lot of gaps that are starting to show up. So in a lot of cases, that's also the limit of record keeping that we run into. When we do a DNA test, each of the companies give us different parts of the information depending on which test we do with them. They all offer autosomal DNA test, and sometimes just the way that they break things down give us a little different information. They may not all match the same if you're looking at ethnicities or percentages of what your ad makeup is, but if you go through, you're going to find on each of those sites that you have different matches on each of those because they all have their own unique database. They all have their own pool of people that have tested with them. So you may find some matches in MyHeritage that you don't have in Ancestry, but some in Ancestry you don't have in MyHeritage or FT Family Tree DNA. And they all offer you slightly different tools of how to work with your results. So things, sometimes it's the semantics. If we look at the Ancestry one at the bottom left, the right side of that is through lines. That's a way of showing you how you're possibly related. And that's using both your DNA matches, but also their tree and your tree, and sometimes a third person's tree to see if they can find a path through it. And that's using AI to actually figure out these paths. And sometimes when you get a path, it may give you 1, 2, 3, up to 6 possible different paths that you've got to pick which one is the most likely, but it helps you then go into the tree and do research and prove that relationship. Now, getting back to the Y-DNA I did with Martin, if you look at the far right, is Martin and I match, and there's 2 of us in that particular one. And if you look at the top line, it's about roughly 13 generations back, very roughly. And I started off with doing the Y67. That didn't give me the information I wanted. I did a Y111, which was just an upgrade. I just paid for the difference. That didn't give me better results. And I finally ended up springing for the big Y, which is 700 items, markers. And that is when Martin and I really connected as unique. Now, if I mentioned about roughly 13 generations back, if we look at my paper trail, it goes back between 11 and 12 generations roughly. So the earliest one I've been able to find, and I'm still working on the proof on that, would be David McBean in 1692. And even though my last name is spelled B-E-A-N, it's pronounced McBean, my dad and my grandfather were always so insistent that you had to pronounce your last name McBean. So as I go back through, indeed, some of them did spell their last name with A-I-N. And in fact, I had 2 couples married. One was an E-A-N and one was an A-I-N. And one of their offspring must have been a little confused when he arrived in North Dakota. He put all the letters in his last name and he became McBean, but it was E-A-I-N. So I can always track any descendant of him because they're the unique way of spelling that name. Just to give you a sense of some of what was happening in the 1600s in Scotland, we got a Union of the Crown, so there's a lot of turmoil politically. we get a big change in the church going on at the time. They things like they're in Scotland, they bring in mandatory schools for every location or every parish, and we get several different conflicts and wars going on. So it's a very turbulent time. You know, did someone fight on the wrong side and switch names? That's possible. There's so many things that could have taken place at that time. So here we have what I'm shown in the 1500s, roughly, and on. This particular one is a church or kirk session records, and it's where I got the information on David. So we're able to go back and find things in Scotland because they have a very old record keeping mandatory session and kirk records. When one time my wife and I visited Scotland, we were walking through Nairn, and we came across a street called Church Street, and it was a short street. And we looked left and right and down the street, and we couldn't see a church, so we had to go to the end of it to see why it was called Church Street. And right down by the river, there was a ruins, and in there I found an old gravestone that had a McBean name on it. When I looked at it, I didn't think it was mine because the wife's name was wrong. So I took a picture of it anyways, and later I found out that James had remarried, and this indeed was his, because the other thing is the daughter and two daughters and the son all matched what was on the stone. Unfortunately, the very bottom of it had been hit so many times by the lawnmower, I couldn't read some of the details at the bottom. So if we're looking at autosomal DNA, we're looking to find cousins. So it's whether it's second, third, fourth cousins or second cousins once removed, we're able to go through, and there's charts out there that you probably have one already, where you can figure out how people are related. So it's you and your siblings, and then your aunt and uncle's child is your first cousin, and you move across second, third, fourth, fifth cousins as you move further and more distant and distant relationships. And one of the things I love about these charts is I know people that can go in and they start talking about people and they're going, oh, that's my first cousin 3 times removed, and blah, blah, blah. And in their head, they can figure out how these people fit. I've never been good at that. So I always keep one of these charts handy just to be able to both figure out how I'm related to someone, or if someone says that that's how we're related, I can look up to see just how many generations back you have to go before you get a common ancestor. Now, working with DNA matches, there's several different methods that are used by people, because one of the things you have to do is start figuring out who these people likely are. What group do they fit into? There's different terms that are used, and one of them, if you look up Leeds method, and it's in the handout link, it gives you a process of how you can work through all your matches and try to put people initially into different groupings that are commonly related there, and how they're related to you. They probably all go back to the same distant common ancestor, or up that same line at least. MyHeritage has a tool that's called AutoCluster that goes in and generates the clusters for you. And then Ancestry also has something that's called Masters by Cluster that will go in, and it's an additional fee that you have to pay. It's called the Pro Tools. It's a new level of service that they've added. And quite often, what you find in Pro Tools is some of the tools that are brought out into Pro Tools, once they've worked with them and decide where they actually fit, the odd one will be put into the next upgrade of Ancestry for everyone, but you get early release and early chances to use a lot of the software. Some things may always end up in Pro Tools. Everyone has to decide whether it's worth the extra expense or not. Now, adoption research is something that it's very sensitive, and if you're going to do any of this with, or work with someone on it, it requires a lot of tact and patience, because sometimes the person at the other end doesn't want anyone to know what happened. Other times it's a joyous relations, and two of the ones I know of personally that I've dealt with, it turned out that the other side had really wanted to be in touch, but had lost any ability to make that connection, and they were so happy and they want to be part of each other's lives now. Because the funniest part is, um, one friend, when she flew to Edmonton to meet her birth mother, the mother walked up to the airport and said, "Oh, this is so wonderful. I finally have a daughter that looks like me." All of her other children were, she was a short, dark-haired French Canadian woman of descendant, and all of her daughters were blonde and tall. And my friend was French Canadian looking, dark haired woman that they look very much like each other. So, and they've kept in touch ever since and visit back and forth. So sometimes it's the adoptee is curious. Sometimes it's the parent later in life perhaps wants to try to track down. So the odd time that people don't want to know, they don't want the connection. So you have to deal with that. One of the things you realize when you get into DNA testing is that sometimes you find things you don't want to know, and you can't unknow those things. So if you find out, for example, someone was adopted and they don't know that, it may not be a good thing. And even taking it a step further, they may or you may find that they're actually related to someone that they don't want to be related to. So one of the themes or the things that we think about doing with DNA is test wide. Um, if you can test your parents, that's the best, or grandparents, that's the best. But if not, test all of your siblings, because even though you get 50% of your DNA from each of your parents, each of the siblings get a different random order of those. So you'll all have different matches, unique either to you or to a couple of you. And if they say if you're lucky enough to have 5 of you, that you're more likely to have, it's about 90 some odd percent of the DNA should be represented in between the 5 of you. So we've looked at a few of the things you might run into is the unrealistic expectations that you're going to be able to go in there and track your ancestors back for hundreds of years. Sometimes if either you or the person on the other end of the DNA match hasn't done sufficient genealogical research, it may be a lot of work or very difficult to try to match the two of you together or figure out where the most recent common ancestor is. The things like the ethnicity or nationality or your cultural identity. We've all seen the commercial. I thought it was German, but I found out I was Scottish, so I had to get rid of the lederhosen and get the kilt, or it might be the opposite way. I can't remember how that went, but how tied are you to the ethnicity estimates? And they're a fun thing. They are an estimate though, and it's a thing to keep track of. Some people get quite upset when they look at their estimate and it doesn't tell them that they are what they think they are. So part of it is looking into how each company generates those reports. And just to understand or to get a better understanding when we do have that, to go in and look at the history and the ancestral homeland. So we get things like Alsace-Lorraine has over the years been traded back and forth between the Germans and the French. So some people may have come to North America and they were German from that area. At a different point in time, some people may have come and they were French at that point from the same area. And sometimes the marketing companies aren't that helpful. They are marketing companies after all. They're in business to sell you testing kits and such. So you look at and catchphrases like discover your origins and connect with relatives. They make it sound like it's going to be so easy. It does take a bit of work, and some of their advertising sometimes is a little misleading, just the way they market it. And for some of the companies, they're not really science-based companies. They are really marketing or business companies. Others are much more scientifically rooted. And if you're really serious about it and you want to find the broadest connection, you need to test through multiple companies if you're serious about testing this, because you will find different matches at different companies. So, and to give you a reason why DNA is really random, if you will, and it's not a science, like a hard science, is that we all share 99.9% of the DNA sequence. That's what makes us human. And the 0.1% is what makes it different between person to person. So there's a lot of overlap between people, but they're looking at a very narrow part, the bracket that defines individuals. And when they look at those points in the DNA, they're measuring in what's called centimorgans, or cm, and that's is really, if you think of a yardstick or a meter stick, there's different names. It's a unit of measurement. You really don't have to study and have a PhD in genetics to be able to actually use DNA in the genealogy. But it's DNA is about seeing what you and your match have in common, and a sense of how closely you're related based on the centimorgans that you share in certain parts of your DNA. So full siblings should be close to, in terms of percentage, 50% of the DNA should be shared with each other. And as you move out, that percentage drops rather quickly. So if we look at that, if we're looking at it in terms of centimorgans, if you're looking at roughly 3,500 for a parent-child, or identical twins, obviously are going to be higher than that if they're identical. And you work down through siblings, about 2,500. And one of the things interesting on the chart is just how much variation comes into this. Because if the numbers are shrinking, but if you look at 2 times 2,400, it's way over the upper range. Whereas if you get to the very bottom, 2 times 6 is 12. Well, it goes from 6 to 20. So there's a much broader range in centimorgans that could be that anywhere from a 5th to 8th cousin by the time you get down to that point. And these ranges overlap, so that when you look at it, the same number might fall into one or the other range. So that these are giving you a rough estimate, but in reality, those ranges overlap each other, and sometimes it's hard to tell between the second cousin or first cousin once removed and such. So I mentioned you hit pay dirt, or more likely if you find someone that you connect to, and when in the top case is that family line that you're trying to connect to, no one has taken a DNA test, so you're not going to find a match there. Or it just may be the database that you're looking in, there's no one there that matches. And sometimes if you get a match, but they don't have a tree, it's just trying to figure out how you're related in terms of genealogical research. And it's not the DNA that's going to tell you how you're related. It's by actually going in and doing the genealogical research and proving the trail to say, well, that person is my second cousin. So that is how you prove the estimate that you're given with the DNA. So I've mentioned several times that it's a random process, that you're going to inherit DNA from your ancestor, but it does not mean that you all get the same genetic material. So the more closely related, the higher the centimorgans, the higher the percentage is going to be. But on the other side, the further back we go, the more distant the relationship, it becomes harder and harder to um, uh, find the actual relationship between you and a more distant, that's a third, fourth, fifth cousin. So if we look at things like going back to the ethnicity estimate, some think it's more cultural identity is a better way of saying it. Other people want to call it a geopolitical organization, a geopolitical area. And so is it looking at some people look at Great Britain and say they're all British, whereas if you're Scottish, you don't want to be lumped in with the British in the background. The local identity, sometimes there's mountains, rivers, or seas or divide people up. And even in one country, you can have some very self-sufficient communities that develop their own strong sense of identity. And in some cases, they develop a very unique DNA signature, if you will. So something like the Living DNA, which is a company that specializes in Great Britain, their areas, whereas Ancestry may say that you're Scottish, they might break it down into a much smaller area like Highland, Lowland, or Northern Isles and such. If you look at Ancestry at one time, they used to call everyone Irish. And when I looked into it, one of the explanations I got was, well, Americans don't know what Celt is. And the Celts were people that were the people that inhabited Ireland, Scotland, and even Brittany over on the French coast. So you had a very large swath, but they said, well, people in America wouldn't know what that was, so they called them Irish because they know what Irish was. Now, Ancestry breaks things down more closely, and it will say Scottish, Irish, and such, that your ethnicity estimate keeps changing, and it's based on a group of people that either tested that have a known history in an area, and they're saying, well, that's a control group, and if you match into them, that is your Irish, or that is you're Scottish, or whatever. And then sometimes we end up, if we look at Great Britain, there's been a huge influence of other groups coming into Great Britain. So we have things like the Celts, the Scots, the Anglo-Saxons, Norse, Viking, Irish. The Angles, the Danes, and the Normans all contributed their bloodlines to the British Isles. And some people are quite put off when they know they have Scottish ancestors going way back, and they say, well, my DNA test says I have people from Norway or people from Scandinavia, a percentage in there. Where does that come from? You get that influence of different people traveling and coming in and out of different countries. And then sometimes when we look at a given area, just those boundaries of moving around, people have a linguistic difference. So you might say that people in Scotland speak English, or some people in Scotland speak Scottish Gaelic, or some speak what's called Broad Scots. And I'll give you a sample.
Keep the Haid. We're going to learn a wee bit about the languages of Scotland. I'm Jeff Wallenfeld, and I love languages. Scotland has three main languages: English, Scottish Gaelic, and Scots. English is spoken by most everyone in the country. Scottish Gaelic, now an endangered language, is used by less than 60,000 people in their daily lives. It's taught in Scottish schools, however, and in recent years there have been some promising efforts to preserve and revive it. And then there's Scots, sometimes called Lowland Scots to differentiate from Gaelic. In the latest census, over 1.5 million people reported being able to speak Scots. That's more than a quarter of the population of Scotland. But most Americans have never heard of it. So what is it? Because there's no formal linguistic distinction between a language and a dialect, there's much debate about which of these categories Scots fits into. Since it's mutually intelligible with English, some people think of it as a dialect of English, or even slang. Non-Scots may confuse it for a particularly heavy Scottish accent. What do you think? Let's see if you can guess the meaning of some of these Scots words. A boot. Okay, that's a pretty easy one. A boot means about. Coo. Tougher? That one means cow. Mare means more. Tatty. That's a bit tricky, but you may recognize some of the similarity. Tatty means potato or tater to some of us in America. So if someone in Scotland encourages you to hey mare tatties, you might get that they're offering you extra potatoes. Whether you fall on the language or the dialect side of the debate, Scots is fascinating to explore. Just might help you understand those quick Scottish accents too.
So we end up by studying the area that our ancestors lived in. And one of the things that makes me realize is some of the mistakes, what I see as mistakes in census records or official records may have been because my ancestors were Gaelic speaking, living in Ontario, and if the census taker came around, if they went to register a birth in that, you get some strange spelling because they may have spoken with a strong Scottish accent. Now, I mentioned about the Celts, or the as they in this one say the Irish. You can see how the influence of the Irish spread, and the scale on the right gives us the percentage of each of the colored areas. But the Celts actually moved out through all of Europe, and there's a certain pockets that are much higher population or registration, such as Brittany, that is connected strongly to the Celts. So our relationship to and the approximate percentage of DNA you're going to share, as I mentioned, the parents, you get 50% from each. Your grandparents, 25, 12 and a half. So you can see every generation back, it goes down to half. And that is why the further we try to go back in time, the harder it gets, because we're getting less and less DNA from that ancestor. So we're dealing with that that problem that most of us, if we've been researching for any length of time, you've had, or obviously you have your parents, your grandparents, hopefully the great-grandparents. Some of us have all of our great-great-grandparents and back that way. When you try to push it further back and you're trying to use only DNA to do it, it becomes more difficult the further back you go. But it will connect you to a lot of the auxiliary lines when you broaden out your tree and you start looking at the other descendants of each of those, for example, great-great-grandparents. Some of the families back then would have 10 to 12 children. You can imagine how many offspring there are out there that may be testing. One of those may have the old family Bible. One of those may have a unique document, or they've actually tracked back further that may, when you start communicating with them, you may be able to find out additional generations that you do not have at that time. So genealogy and DNA go hand in hand, and you're researching, trying to develop a sense of what your ancestors' world looked like. So to add more interest, to add more bones, the family history side of it is that you're going to explore the history and culture of your ancestors, and then expand your knowledge of DNA and try to make sense of the two worlds. The DNA in your genealogical tree, if they don't match, why don't they match? And go in and start breaking that down and trying to work through some of those roadblocks and brick walls that you've hit over the years. The ability to get additional information through DNA provides you with a lot of things that you may not have been able to find just doing your paper research.
All right,
So
that
with
was
that,
great.
open up to
Go ahead.
questions.
Yeah, is there any questions from anybody? If there is, please type them in the chat box, and either Alan or Jane or myself, we'll get to them. I like the one point that you made about not, at the very beginning, you talked about this, not getting hung up on the surname. So when results come back and, you know, that name that you're looking for, your surname is not there, don't be disappointed and have those blinders so tightly on that you can't consider, you know, all the other alternatives. So that was a good point. Alan, do you have questions there? I saw you turn your camera on, so I'm assuming maybe.
I am not seeing anything.
All right. I did have a comment from Deborah. She said, I am trying to find where my paternal Irish ancestors came from. I was told to do a living DNA test, so I did. Surprise, it gave me matches in Eastern Europe, which is my maternal side, little from Great Britain, where I know my paternal English Irish ancestors came from. And then she just says, DNA is so interesting with all the results that you get. Then she wrote again, and she said she just had a thought, and she said, I wonder about the no results there. If some of the ancestors were Palatines who went from Germany to Ireland, and that might have influenced the DNA.
Oh, it definitely would have, because that's your bloodline. You know, people, as I say, the different groups that moved in and out of and had influence, particularly in something like Great Britain, we think of it as being a single race of people in Great Britain, where in fact they had a lot of other influences of ones coming over. If we look at the Americans or Canada, we just assume we're a melting pot. We have all those different ethnicities floating around the country, but reality is it happened over there too.
And then Eleanor, she points out that Ancestry just released its latest ethnicity estimates, and they're crazy. I don't know if that's crazy good or crazy bad. I don't know.
Well, and the reference populations, they keep adding or subdividing and working through them. And one of the things I saw recently watching a webinar, I believe it was Blaine Bettinger, said, one of the things you should always do is when you get a new estimate is take a screenshot and save it, because some of them will allow you to go back one generation in the ethnicity estimate. Not all of them do, but reality is, if you track it over time, it's interesting to see how that ethnicity estimate has evolved. And really, it's an estimate. It's not hard science. As they get more and more people testing in an area, they're able to define localities better. And one of the things Blaine said is he didn't get started doing that soon enough, but luckily he has done a number of webinars. In the PowerPoint presentation, he had included a screen grab of his estimates. So he's saying that's the only reason I have those is that over time, I taken a new shot and put it into an updated presentation. So if you're doing DNA, it's a good thing just to keep track of. Whether it helps you in finding relatives, it's hard to say, because people say, well, I used to have Italians last time, but in the new one, I don't have any percentage Italian. So sometimes things come and go based on minute changes in the database.
Yeah, mine, I had heavy Irish, and it has completely flipped to Scottish now, which is
Welcome to the clan.
yeah. Well, the big Y actually, I did the big Y.
Yeah.
They paid part of the price of it to get me into one of the groups, and it was interesting because I did match with a Campbell and a whole bunch of Gillespies from way out, and I thought, hey, I may not be a bastard.
well, and now you're going to have to practice the dialect. If you can say it, Brodelijk, Moeilijk, Nick. No?
No, I'm not going to wrap my tongue around that, I don't think.
Oh, that's an old Harry Lauder song. And as a youth, we had a cottage and a wind-up gramophone, and that was one of the few records we had to listen to.
But definitely the matching was interesting. I had 20 years of paper research behind me when I tested with Ancestry, and it was really interesting because I looked at my matches and I said, oh, that's cousin Doug's kid. And you could just go down the list, bang, 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 bang.
Well, and that's an important thing to do, is to go down your list, and they all allow you to make notes now. And if you go in and once you figure out what the relationship is, if you actually take a few minutes and write a note explaining what the relationship is, um, you're able to go through and start eliminating, well, I already know how I'm related to those people. These ones are the ones I need to work on to figure out how I'm related. And we all think we're going to remember forever. Sometimes I've been doing this for long enough that I'm surprised to find, oh, look I can figure out how this person is related. And I go look in my tree and I go, oh, I already put them in my tree.
But you made a good point earlier, the idea that I made contact with a DNA match who lives in Saskatchewan. And the interesting part of it is my family, my mother and dad were both born out there because great granddad had homesteaded there. And they had Ontario pictures I'd never seen before, which was really slick. They were able to exchange, and I could pass on some of the ones I had to them.
Well, what did you do with pictures? You sent them to the relatives that moved away. And quite often that's the only place that the names are written on the back of were the ones you sent away, because you knew who the people were. Why would you write on the ones you're going to keep? But it's interesting. Sometimes you start looking at matches, and I have a number of matches. I have Australia, I have matches in Great Britain and such. And I've been trying to figure out some of the matches, thinking, well, they've got to go way back before my people left that area as the most recent common ancestor. And to track that family down, one of them, I was so surprised to find out it was someone that went overseas during the war, married a British girl. They came back to Canada, but at some point they moved back to Britain, and their children and their offspring, their grandchildren, now are all in Britain. And it sort of hit me as a revelation that sometimes it's not always going up the tree and down that to get back to Europe. And sometimes it's a modern people have moved over there. So that is where the paper trail proved the relationship. The DNA just said I had someone I was related to in Britain, and I couldn't figure it out that way.
Michael has a question. He says, is Gordon pursuing any strategies to make more sense out of his DNA, his Y DNA results?
Well, that's the embarrassing part. When I first envisioned that presentation, it was going to be the big reveal of how I solved this. And I'm still working on it. What I've done is work back through my line up to James McBean and Naren, trying to make sure that I had the right names in there, looking at the proof, making sure I documented the source citations and everything to prove, using the genealogical proof standard, proving my line back as far as I can get. on the other end, Martin is trying to figure out from his end. He lives in Scotland. He's able to go into some of the repositories there, and there's some records that are still not online. So he's been trying to find any sort of hint that may hint how our two lines are connected. So it's something that we're continuing to work through. Unfortunately, it's that gap that I've gone back at this point as far as I can find reliable records for, or any records for, really. I'm stuck at that point. He's trying to work it from his end. So some of the things like the Scottish people, their online database for government records in Scotland. I used to have a membership there. I let it lapse. I probably have to go back and try doing some more research to see if I can find anything new there. But it's a matter of working back through and proving your genealogical connection as well, so that eventually the idea is those two should come together. And it's there's no magic bullet. It's not just going to boom and appear. It's a matter of doing the work.
So that was one thing that I wrote down when I started doing DNA. I was amazed at how much of a huge learning curve it was. It was like learning how to do genealogy all over again, totally different. So a lot of time watching videos, a lot of, YouTube, Google, tons and tons of things. A lot of webinars are out there. So there's a lot of great educational, sites and platforms and webinars and things to get you going, get you started, and then to narrow down almost every topic on DNA. So yeah, it's a huge learning curve.
Well, and it's also a very scientific based process that you have to learn a lot of things to get better and better at it. The first results come easier. Like you're looking and go, oh, there's my brother, there's my two sisters. Guess what? I matched them. And you start working through your first cousins, and then you start trying to figure out some of the second cousins that are in there. And the hardest part is, let's face it, women, when they're married, they change their last name, and there's no instant recognition of a name, which always helps. So then it's a matter of starting to dig and try to figure it out. If they've got a good tree, that may link to yours. It takes a long way, but it's amazing the number of people that do the test and they put one or two names on a tree, and that's as far as they ever take it. But that probably gives us a hint of how serious they are about genealogy part. They were just interested in finding out their ethnicity, probably, or something like that.
Lois is asking, Gordon, how do you organize the photos on the wall?
They're picture hooks. What's behind me is a pictorial family tree. So it works from the right to the left for my parents and my wife's parents, and working through the ancestral line, and the oldest one's over on the other side. That's which one's there? It's just showing up. Right here, the ones on the second row up are from the 1860s roughly, and those are the oldest pictures I have right now. So as you can see, there's still a few frames that are empty that I need to get some photos for. But it's one of those things that, looking at your background, I can tell that you probably haven't done everything on your to-do list either. As genealogists, we get sidetracked, don't we?
There never seems to be enough time. That was another point was, and I'm guilty of this one because there's never enough time, is checking back on those websites, because they're always updating. People are always retesting, and so it's important to check back now and then to see who's new and see what's new that you can find out. So yeah, time is an issue when you're a genealogist, for sure.
Well, and money too, because let's face it, with all these sites and things costing money, sometimes it's a monetary choice of just how much we can do or what we can join or be part of. I just heard there's a site you can be part of that you link your trees testing sites to, and it sends you an update. You get to choose whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly. It'll send you all the new matches you have since the last time it sent you a notice. And you go, oh, that would be great. But, oh, how much the cost? Oh, I can't afford that.
Yeah, exactly. Several people are saying, thank you so much. That was a great webinar. I don't see any other, a couple other people are saying about the new releases from Ancestry. And I think somebody had said, find, I can't find the other person who had said there was another update now. Since Zoom has changed everything, I have to keep clicking through all the, you can't just see them all out there. Did you have any more questions, Alan, from anyone?
I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, well, maybe we'll wrap it up for tonight because we're heading down to 8:30. I do see one more 23andMe updated, says Deborah. So that was the other one. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. That was very, very a great overview. The handout was popped into the main chat a couple times, so hopefully people were able to download it. And we just want to say thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And Gordon, you too, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to present to a group of people that are really interested in what you say. We all have relatives that we tried to get something really exciting we've done and tried to explain it to them. Their eyes glass over. And so it's
Exactly.
great. Thank
Exactly.
you.
No problem. Thank you so much. And see everybody in November with the respective branches have their November webinar. So thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Cindy.